You sit awake with the glow of other people's successes filling the room, a feed of smiling faces in new cars, a friend's promotion captioned with gratitude, a neighbor's renovated kitchen beaming like a promise. The soundtrack is polished, the lighting perfect, and somewhere between admiration and ache a question tightens in your chest. Why do those doors open for them and stay closed for you? You know the numbers, the spreadsheets, the late-night budgets. You have tried investments that soured, worked overtime for promotions that slipped past, and felt the small, persistent shame of comparison while your own dreams gathered dust on a shelf. The restlessness becomes a call, not dramatic but undeniable, a whisper beneath your daily routines that says there must be another way. You answer by stepping into uncertainty, drafting plans with trembling hands, meeting with advisors whose words feel foreign, daring to risk a piece of what you have. The first attempts teach you quickly. A partner pulls out. A market dips. A promotion goes to someone who smiled louder. Each setback stings, and each sting carves away a little of the confidence you started with. You find yourself in quiet moments, hands wrapped around a mug, asking the ceiling for a reason, for a sign, for a path that belongs to you. Then the guidance arrives, not as thunder but as a voice precise and patient. It does not promise instant riches. It says, delay is not denial, delay is preparation. At first the words feel like a bomb and then like a map. You begin to see losses as apprenticeships. What you lost taught discipline, what you waited for taught patience, what you almost had taught humility. The narrative of scarcity loosens its grip and the work shifts, from chasing shortcuts to stewarding what you have, from frantic comparison to aligning ambition with purpose. You learn to cultivate small disciplines that compound, clearer budgets, steadier investments, wiser conversations about money and meaning. You start testing risk differently, anchored by that calm counsel, and the landscape of possibility opens in ways you couldn't have planned. Tell me, what else frustrates you financially today? If you feel called to keep walking this path, stay with me. In the next moment the first real test appears, and your choice there will change everything. He sits at the kitchen table long after the house has gone quiet, a single lamp throwing a small island of light over scattered statements, an open investment app, and a coffee gone cold. Outside, the city keeps moving, tail lights blinking like other people's lives. He tastes the old ache of comparison, a cousin's new home, an old classmate's startup headline, a neighbor's vacation photos. Earlier confidence has been chewed down by a string of small betrayals, a bad investment that vanished faster than the brochure promised, a promotion that went to someone who smiled louder in the right hallway, a freelance contract that dissolved at the last minute. Each setback exacts its toll, not only on the balance sheet but on the quietly accumulating ledger of self-trust. The first time the voice comes, it is barely more than a warmth at the base of his chest, like sunlight through a curtain. Delay is not denial, it says. He startles, as if someone sat across from him and leaned in. Delay is preparation. There is no thunder, no spectacle, only precise, patient counsel that feels more like a map than an answer. He repeats the phrase aloud until it no longer sounds like consolation and begins to sound like a rule to live by. That simple reframe begins to rearrange the landscape. The failed investment turns into a lesson in due diligence. The red flags he ignored were not mystical traps but teachable moments. The promotion he missed becomes an inventory of skills he can cultivate rather than a verdict on his worth. He stops pretending that momentum looks a certain way and starts asking better questions. What skills must I build? Where have I been careless? How can I steward what I have now so tomorrow's risks are smarter? He makes practical vows that feel spiritual. An emergency fund becomes an altar to patience. A weekly hour of study replaces idle scrolling. A conversation with his partner turns into shared strategy instead of silent anxiety. When doubt creeps in, the same calm counsel returns, this time as soil, and he begins to treat pauses as places to plant, not prisons. One night, standing before the mirror, he practices a new sentence, I will risk differently. The words land with a quiet authority. He is not yet at the place where abundance arrives, but he feels an internal rebalancing, ambition aligned with purpose, impatience softened into disciplined endurance. He is preparing to take a different kind of leap, and in that preparation he finds steady courage. What is the financial frustration you carry that won't leave you alone? In the next steps, he will be tested again, this time with choices that honor both faith and wisdom. You sit at the kitchen table long after the dishes are washed, the blue light of your laptop painting the room a tired kind of honesty. An email titled "Regret to Inform" blinks on the screen, another investment that promised growth and delivered silence. Your hands cradle a mug gone cold. Outside, the city hums on as if urgency were optional. The sting of comparison creeps in like a winter draft. A former colleague posts a new house, an old classmate announces a business exit, and you feel both proud of them and painfully absent from that narrative. You whisper a complaint into the quiet, "Why not me?" A voice answers, softer than you expected, and not as thunder but as quiet counsel. Delay is not denial, it says. Delay is preparation. It's not a mantra but a mapping. It points to the months you spent learning spreadsheets, to the nights you read about markets instead of scrolling social proof. It reframes the failed investment as an apprenticeship, hard, instructive, expensive, but not wasted. You hear it again in the memory of a mentor's advice, in the small ledger you kept when money was tight, in the way you hesitated before a risky promise and thereby avoided a greater loss. You begin to catalog losses differently. Each no becomes a lesson. The promotion you missed taught negotiation and humility, the collapsed partnership taught you due diligence, the impulsive purchase taught you that values must govern choices. You practice stewardship in concrete ways, redesigning a budget by human needs rather than guilt, setting an emergency fund with the same reverence you once reserved for luxury, and carving out 30 minutes a day to study a new skill. Patience becomes an act, not a virtue. You plant routines like seeds, educate, test small, reflect, adjust. The soil of delay is not barren, it is where discipline and character take root. In a late evening conversation with a friend, you say the thing you barely admit to yourself, "I'm tired of doors that stay closed." They listen and then ask, gently, what you would do differently if you believed the delay was preparation. The question lands and opens a space. What else frustrates you financially today? If you want to keep walking this path, learning to risk from a place of wisdom, stay with this story. Soon you'll face a choice where faith and strategy intersect, and that choice will demand everything you've learned so far. The night he sat at the small kitchen table, the bills forming a pale fan under the pool of a single lamp, felt like the end of a road he had been walking in circles. Rain tapped the window as if insisting on rhythm. He replayed the failures, bad stock picks, the promotion that went to someone more polished, the whispered comparisons at family gatherings, and the old ache of "why not me" rose again. Then, quieter than thunder and sharper than advice from a friend, a voice settled into the room with him. Not a spectacle, but a sentence that landed like a seed: delay is not denial, delay is preparation. He heard it both as a command and as a comfort. Prepare, the voice seemed to say, for what you have not yet been trained to hold. It reframed the ledger on the table. Those red numbers stopped being shame and became a curriculum. He began to read his losses as lessons. Why that investment failed showed gaps in due diligence, the missed promotion exposed weaknesses in communication, every pause had been time to learn patience, discipline, and craft. Days turned into a slow montage. He met with a mentor at a coffee shop, and they sketched a budget on a napkin, small, stubborn changes that freed margins. He walked into a community class at a church hall and learned about stewardship, not as austerity but as skillful tending. He practiced patience like a muscle, one deliberate saving, one careful conversation, one clear boundary at a time. When temptation to chase a flashy return surfaced, the same gentle counsel returned: risk differently, risk with wisdom and purpose. Home projects replaced speculative dreams. He invested in knowledge before capital, and in relationships before deals. He started giving a little to causes that lit him up. Generosity became a compass, aligning ambition with meaning. The stakes felt real, but they had a different weight now, anchored to service rather than ego. On a morning when the sun finally broke through the rain, he closed his ledger with a steadier breath. The door that once felt shut was not opening yet, but it no longer felt locked, it was being prepared for him to walk through. What else frustrates you financially today? In the next part, He will face a fork where faith and wiser choices demand a bold, different kind of risk. The weeks that follow are not fireworks, they are the patient cadence of someone learning to row against a stubborn tide. She returns each night to the kitchen table, the soft halo of a single lamp carving a small island of light. Receipts, spreadsheets, and a dog-eared notebook are spread like a map. Outside, the city hums; inside, there is prayer and a quiet conversation. Not denial, the voice has said before, not thunder but a steady whisper. Preparation. Tonight the whisper becomes a checklist: learn, steward, align. A palette of small, deliberate acts replaces the frantic chase. They set a weekly budget and automate a modest transfer to savings, then breathe when the balance grows not by leaps but by inches. They enroll in a financial workshop at the local community center, where a retired teacher with a laugh like gravel shows them how compounding works and how to price their time. In the grocery aisle, they test restraint: a can of generic instead of brand, a refusal to borrow hope from a credit card. When old impulses resurface, get-rich-quick schemes, comparisons to friends' glossy successes, the whisper returns, sharper for its calm: every loss is apprenticeship. Name the lesson. In a late-night moment, the protagonist speaks aloud to the stillness: what if I still get it wrong? The answer is simple and precise, like a hand guiding fingers on a compass: then you practice more. Then you fail with intention and learn faster. Delay is soil. Tears come, not of defeat but of release. They call a friend who once started a small business and ask for mentorship. The friend says, "I'll look over your plan. Start selling what you already know how to do." They price a service, make one sale, and the money feels different, earned and meaningful, a pebble that changes the stream's path. Setbacks do not vanish, an investment still underperforms, a promotion still slips away. But each disappointment is catalogued now: mistake, insight, adjustment. The protagonist begins to teach what they've learned, offering a free webinar to neighbors, sharing a budgeting tip at a family dinner, because transforming scarcity into service both enlarges and clarifies purpose. Confidence grows not from spectacle but from competence. And then, as preparation settles into muscle memory, a new opportunity edges into view, an uncertain risk that asks for more than money: courage. What else frustrates you financially today? If this resonated, stay with me, because the next step asks you to risk differently, anchored by what you've been building. You sit at the kitchen table while rain taps the window, a stack of statements like small islands of worry. The ache of missed chances is fresh, the investment that soured, the promotion that slipped away. You replay the moments, angry at luck, at timing, at yourself. Then a voice, not a thunderclap but precise and patient, breaks through the noise: delay is not denial. It lands like a lighthouse beam across a dark sea. You can almost hear the cadence, gentle and sure: delay is preparation. That sentence reframes everything. The sting of a loss becomes a tutor's lesson. You remember the night you hid from calls and instead opened a book on cash flow, the afternoon you asked a colleague how they closed that deal, the humble spreadsheet you started to track every expense. These are not random acts of busy work, they are the slow accretion of skill and character. In a small, sunlit cafe you rehearse a conversation you once feared. In the quiet of a park you practice patience, discovering that waiting can be active, a season in which you sharpen judgment and deepen faith. A memory surfaces, your first meeting after the failed investment. You were defensive, then honest. "I rushed," you admitted aloud to a friend. They smiled and said, "You're learning the worth of preparation." That simple exchange is holy in its way. God's counsel shows up in human voices, in mentors, in the stillness where you choose to try again differently. Stewardship becomes your new liturgy, allocating time, energy, and money with intention. You learn to say no to quick wins that erode values and yes to slow compound choices that honor purpose. Confidence arrives not as an explosion but as a quiet readiness. You take a smaller, wiser risk later, not because fear vanished but because wisdom now steadies your hand. The world still tests you, but each setback is now soil for growth. What financial frustration sits on your table tonight that could be preparation in disguise? If this resonates, stay with the journey, there is a next step waiting where faith and strategy finally converge. Morning light finds you at the same kitchen table where you once signed leases and paid late fees, only now there's a notebook open, a cup of coffee steaming, and something else you can almost feel, an intention that sits like a small, deliberate flame. The city hums outside, indifferent, but inside the apartment the air has changed. You whisper, not to anyone, teach me, and the memory of that quiet voice returns, not loud, not miraculous, but precise, delay is not denial, delay is preparation. Those words, spoken before, settle into your ribs and begin to organize your movements. You start with small disciplines. A budget becomes a practice, not a punishment. You speak to your money as if it were a person who needs care, where it will sleep, where it will grow. You patch holes, subscriptions you forgot about, meals taken as convenience, and in doing those mundane things you learn a deeper language of stewardship. There are days you want to sprint, to make up for lost years, but each time impatience rises you imagine that patient voice again and breathe. Learn the soil, it says. Prepare the seed. So you invest in knowledge, a night class on financial fundamentals, afternoons with a mentor who runs a modest business and has the stubborn calm of someone who has weathered storms, Saturdays volunteering at a community finance clinic where you see other lives reshaped by simple counsel and steady habits. Setbacks still come. A small investment turns sour, and for a moment you taste the old shame. A promotion slips through your hands and you feel the familiar tug of comparison. But the narrative has shifted. Loss reads now as apprenticeship. You journal the lessons loudly, what assumptions led you wrong, how haste masked opportunity, which relationship sustained you. In a quiet scene at the community clinic, an older woman takes your hand and says, "You didn't waste that money. You bought patience." You laugh with a humbled, grateful sound, because she is right, the pause cultivated discernment. Risk takes on a new contour. It is not reckless chasing, it is a measured step taken with roots underfoot. You test a side project, not because you must, but because it aligns with your gifts and serves the people you love. Conversations at the dining table become strategy sessions, you map out contingencies while holding prayerful attention to direction. God's counsel feels less like instruction and more like a compass you consult when maps are unclear. You are learning to steward resources, to ask better questions, to let ambition be tempered by purpose. And in that recalibration, confidence grows, not loud, but steady and relentless. You notice also how your compass points outward, prosperity begins to look like capacity to help, to hire, to mentor. If this scene resonates with you, leave a quiet like and tell me, what else frustrates you financially today? Stay with me, the next step is the moment you risk differently, and it changes everything. The morning light slips between the blinds, painting the kitchen table in soft gold as you sit with last night's receipts spread like a map of battles fought and lost. The numbers stare back, but they no longer feel like judgment. Somewhere between the failed investment and the promotion that never came, a quieter voice has been guiding you. God doesn't shout, he speaks with the precision of a watchmaker, pulling apart each cog of your life and showing how delay has been making room for skill, humility, and the right timing. You remember the first time you heard it plainly, delay is not denial, delay is preparation. Not a consolation, but a strategy. You imagine the seasons of your life as a field left fallow, every setback a turning of the soil. In that light, the late rent, the missed bonus, the empty inbox of opportunity become apprenticeships. You begin to catalog them differently, lessons rather than losses. The failed fund taught patience, the interview that went badly taught clarity in your value, the friend who succeeded taught you what not to envy and what to emulate. There are evenings when you speak aloud, testing ideas. What now? You ask the quiet room. The answer arrives not as an order but as a careful plan, steward what you have, learn where you lack, risk less as a spectacle and more as a measured offering. So you cut one unnecessary subscription, call an old mentor, set a small weekly savings goal and open a micro account for learning, courses, books, a community group. Each small discipline is an act of faith, and each small result, a confirmation. You find yourself mentoring a neighbor, teaching them the spreadsheet you built. The act of giving back sharpens your gratitude. God's message folds into practical choices, patience becomes a budget, faith becomes an investment thesis, and ambition finds alignment with purpose. You no longer chase quick wins, you prepare a staged entrance into prosperity. Outside, clouds gather and then part. You sense the approach of something larger, a decision that will require courage and the careful risk you've been rehearsing. Will you step forward when the moment calls? What else frustrates you financially today, and what small step could change that story? Stay with this question as the next moment arrives. Night after night you sit at the kitchen table, a single lamp carving islands of light across spreadsheets and crumpled receipts. The sting of past mistakes, an investment that soured, a promotion that slipped away, the late realization you'd been comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 10, weighs on your hands. But the voice that first called you inward is quieter now, steady as a watchman. Delay is not denial, delay is preparation. It's not a sermon shouted from a mountaintop, but a line drawn in the margin of your life, precise and patient. You begin to read your losses as textbooks. Each mistake becomes a lecture you can retake. In the months that follow you practice small acts of stewardship. You close an app that feeds impulse, and the relief is almost audible. You meet with a mentor in a coffee shop that smells of dark roast and rain. She hands you a worn notebook and says, "Make this the ledger of your learning." You take a night class on financial planning, not out of shame but curiosity. The classroom hums with ordinary people, teachers, nurses, a mechanic, each trading tactics and tenderness. When someone jokes about starting over at 40, the whole table smiles, no longer a defeat, the restart has become a deliberate step. God's counsel arrives in unexpected cadences, a line from a hymn that changes how you pitch a proposal, a sudden clarity in traffic that helps you negotiate a loan, a neighbor's invitation to co-invest in a community garden that teaches you to plant before you expect harvest. You reframe risk. Instead of chasing quick wins, you test assumptions with small, repeatable experiments. You practice patience by stretching timelines and by celebrating incremental gains, a client retained, a debt reduced, a day when you finally say no to an opportunity that doesn't honor your values. One evening you stand before a mirror and answer a hard question aloud: what does prosperity mean for me? The answer surprises you: security for your family, the freedom to give, a life shaped by purpose. That clarity changes how you spend, save, and speak about money. Your ambition is no longer a roar but a compass needle, steady toward meaning. As your confidence grows, you're tempted to look back at the old doorways that stayed closed. You don't resent them, you now see them as guides that redirected you toward a stronger route. What still frustrates you financially today? Hold that question, soon you'll be asked to risk differently, and what comes next will test everything you've rebuilt. The lamp throws a soft pool of light across the kitchen table where bills, a worn notebook, and a laptop glow like constellations of past choices. Outside, rain taps the window in a steady, forgiving rhythm. He breathes in, fingers tracing the margin notes he's made over months, lessons from failure, phrases from prayers, numbers rewritten until they look less like a threat and more like a map. The voice of God, never loud, always precise, settles into him again, not as command but as counsel. Delay is preparation. You have been learning to steward, to wait, to grow. Use what you learned. At the community center the next morning, he sits across from a young woman who wants to start a craft business but fears the first order. He doesn't lecture. He talks about margin, about pricing that honors craft and sustains life, about saving a fraction of each sale. He tells her about the time he lost a chunk of money and how the loss taught him to ask better questions. Her eyes change, curiosity replacing dread, and he realizes the greatest fruit of his preparation is the ability to give what he was missing: practical hope. A week later, under a fluorescent boardroom light, he makes a pitch to a cautious investor. The old him would have promised sky-high returns. Now he speaks with calm restraint, timelines rooted in skill building, contingency plans, a modest ask to validate the model. When the investor hesitates, he offers to start smaller, to prove the concept without risking more than he can afford to lose. That humility is not defeat, it is wisdom. The investor nods. A seed is planted. Setbacks arrive, the prototype breaks, a client postpones, but each setback is met with steady preparation, repair, pivot, phone call after phone call. Faith becomes a rhythm: get up, do the work, listen for the quiet counsel that nudges the next right step. Nights are still long, but mornings come with clearer priorities. He begins to steward not only money but time and attention. He teaches, he learns, he scales slowly. When someone asks how he changed, he shrugs and smiles. I stopped treating risk like a gamble and started treating it like stewardship. What else frustrates you financially today? If these moments of practical, spiritual direction resonate, stay with this journey, subscribe and walk the next steps with us as the test that follows will ask everything he's learned. You stand at the kitchen window as dawn pours like honey across the street, the same street where, a year ago, you paced with worry and a stack of unpaid bills. Today the light feels different because you do. There is the small, sacred clink of a spoon against a cup. The paper in your hands is not an eviction notice but a plan you wrote in ink and bone. In that quiet, a memory surfaces, the voice that guided you through the wilderness, not thunder but a precise whisper that once said, "Delay is not denial." You repeat it now with new understanding. It sits like a lodestone in your chest, turning every past mistake into instruction and every misstep into a map. You remember the nights of comparison, when someone else's success felt like a locked door. You remember the failed investment that taught you boundaries, the missed promotion that taught you leverage, the humility of smaller steps that rebuilt trust with yourself. Those failures were not punishment, they were workshops. You whisper aloud, "Thank you," and the room answers with the calm certainty of purpose. A partner crosses behind you and squeezes your shoulder. "You chose differently," they say, and you both smile because the choice was anchored, finally, by faith and disciplined action. In the months that followed, you learned to steward. Budgets became blueprints, skills became capital, patience became profit. You risked again, but now with wisdom and prayer braided together, diversified, mentored, prudent. The tapestry of your life shifted. The returns were not only financial but moral: generosity, time, the capacity to coach someone else through the very fog you once navigated. You give away what you were given, and in that giving the abundance multiplies. This is not the end of a chase for money, it is the opening of a life aligned. If this story landed in you like a steadying hand, take it forward, practice small acts of stewardship today, name one lesson you learned from a past setback, and lean into the patient work. What else frustrates you financially today? If this resonated, consider liking and stay with us. Subscribe to receive the next message that will meet you where you are and guide you onward.